Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about smart objects and also using filters. So basically, your image comes in and it's just its regular image. However, we can create it, we can make it into a smart object, which I'm going to show you how to do that. And what this allows us to do is apply filters without making any changes directly to the pixels. So it's a non-destructive way to work with an image. This also allows us to resize images so that we don't lose any of the resolution. So if you're familiar with Illustrator and working with vectors, a smart object also allows you to work with vectors in Photoshop without losing that resolution, without compromising those pixels. So I have this image of a butterfly, and what I'm going to do is today I'm going to walk you through creating kind of a watercolor effect using watercolor brushes in Photoshop. So basically you can take any photograph and make it look like a watercolor painting. I'm following the tutorial by Spoon Graphics, and I'll provide that link for you. So basically the first thing that we're going to do is turn this image or this layer into a smart object. So the way that we do that is I'm going to unlock this layer just by clicking on that lock symbol. It's going to change the name to layer 0. I hit it too many times. And then you're going to right click and you're going to go down to where it says convert to smart object. Now what you're going to notice is that when you convert it to a smart object, you're going to get this little kind of symbol down here at the bottom right. You'll also notice that when you have that layer selected in the properties panel, it tells you embedded smart object. So it actually lets you know that this is a smart object. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you the difference between applying a filter to a smart object versus a non-smart object. So actually what I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this if you're following along, but I'm going to duplicate this layer, and in order to turn something into no longer a smart object, we do the opposite, which is called rasterizing. So I'm going to go down here to where it says rasterize layer. You're going to see that little box disappeared. So I have one that has a smart object and one that doesn't. So the first step in turning this into kind of like a watercolor painting is using filters from the filter gallery. So we're going to go up to where it says filter on the menu and go down to where it says filter gallery. And the filters generally, if they're just applied alone, can be kind of cheesy and not look really refined. So actually when you use them in this kind of way, this image is really big, so I'm just gonna lower this a little bit. So you can see that right now I have the glowing edges effect on here. I'm not going to be using that one. But basically, like, some of these can be kind of cheesy. The one that I'm looking for first is actually dry brush. So I'm going to go under artistic and I'm going to find that dry brush filter. And when we apply multiple filters, we can kind of get more of like a painterly effect. But when you only apply one, it starts to look a little cheesy. Okay, so we're going to change the settings, the brush setting, we're going to change it to 10. And brush detail is also going to be 10. And then my texture is going to be 1. And you should see kind of the preview is taking a little bit longer, but there's a little blue thing here that's going to show you what that looks like. And so that's what it's going to look like. You don't actually see that much of a change, but I'm going to hit OK. So now what you're going to notice is I applied that to my layer that was not a smart object. And if I turn off and on the layer above, which is the smart object, you can kind of see the changes that filter made. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select my layer that is a smart object and I'm going to apply that same filter. So actually if I just hit filter gallery, what it's going to do is it's actually going to automatically select like the same filter that I just had, and I'm just going to hit OK. And it's important to kind of like realize what filters you're applying when. So if you just go to that filter gallery, it's going to take you automatically back to that filter. So what you'll notice here is the one with the smart object actually has something called smart filters, and it has filter gallery. So this is actually my filter. Now another thing like that's positive about this, so when you have a filter applied to a smart object, you're going to see these little circles. It lets you know. If I click on this little drop down, it's going to show me that I have a smart filter applied. And then it's also going to have this little slider tool here. And if I double click on that, I actually have the ability to change the transparency and also the blending mode of that particular filter. So this is really beneficial if you're like, I want to apply this filter, but I don't want it to be too like extreme. I want to be able to still see the image underneath of it and that kind of thing. So now we're not doing anything to like this particular filter. And as of right now, I just want to show you that like when you apply filters to a layer that is not a smart object, it makes a permanent change to those pixels. So if I want to go back and change this filter later, I can do it with a smart object. I can't if it's not a smart object. So I'm going to just delete my non-smart object now, my rasterized image, because I don't need it. I'm only going to work with this smart object. So if you're starting to apply these filters and you don't see the smart filters or these little circles here, you know that you are not doing something right. Okay, so that means that your object is not a smart object. All right, so the next filter I'm going to apply, I'm going to actually go up to filter again, go to filter gallery. I'm not going to go to this top one because that's going to just take me back. I'm going to go to this one that just says filter gallery. It's going to take me to like a new gallery. And then I'm going to apply a cutout filter. All right, so that's going to be this one here. And I'm going to set the number of levels to 5. And I'm going to set the edge simplicity to 4, which it already is, and the edge fidelity to 1. Okay, so the effect that you're going to get here is kind of like this like posterized look, almost like it's cut paper or something like that. And then I'm going to hit OK, and that's going to apply that filter. Okay, so now I want to make a change to this particular filter because I want to be able to see that original image underneath of it. So what I want to do is change the blending mode. So again, you have to make sure that your filters are kind of expanded and you can see each one. And so this is my first one, this is my second one. They go in order from top to bottom. I'm going to double click on that setting the slider thing and hit OK here. And what I want to do is change the blending mode, which is how the layer that we're working with, or in this case, the filter, interacts with the image below it. And what I want to do is change this from normal to pin light. And then I'm going to hit OK. And what that should do is it should change that cutout filter. I think I changed the wrong one actually. So let me go back. So I guess I got them mixed up. So the top one is the last one that you created. The bottom one is the first one that you created. So I'm going to change this to normal because that's my brush filter. And then I want to change this one to pen light. I think I double clicked on it too many times. Okay, yeah, so I can see a little preview of that filter. And so it makes it easier to know which one you're working with. So I just changed that to pin light and I'm gonna hit OK. All right, so the next step is I'm gonna go to filter again, and then I'm gonna go to blur this time, and I'm gonna go to where it says smart blur. And in here, I'm going to change the radius to 5, and I'm going to change the threshold to 100. And I'm going to change the quality to high, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right, so this is putting a little bit of blur on the image. And so here you can see that it says Smart Blur. So the last filter that you applied is at the top. And so I'm going to double click here and I'm going to change the blending mode from this to screen, and I'm going to reduce the opacity as well. And that's going to go down to like 50%. So this is just giving it kind of like a softer effect, like you would find if you were kind of creating any sort of painting. Okay, so I'm changing the blending mode to screen. Which is here under lighten, and I'm changing the opacity to 50%, and then I'm hitting OK. All right, so the next step is we're applying another filter. So we're gonna go to where it says filter, and this time we're gonna go down to where it says stylize, and then we're gonna choose find edges. So this is gonna kind of like when you do any sort of watercolor painting, you get like edges are a little bit darker because the water collects there. So we're trying to get that effect here. All right, so we've got that find edges. You're gonna double click on this setting again, those little sliders, and this time we're going to change the blending mode to multiply, which is going to kind of just add it to the other, like the rest of the filters and image behind it. Okay, so I'm changing this to multiply. Now you can see all that other image. And so if you actually click on any of these eyeballs, you can kind of see like the before and after of what the image looked like before you applied those filters. Okay, so now what we're doing is you're gonna find a free paper texture. So like you want that texture of like watercolor paper to kind of be a part of this image. So I'm actually just going to go to File and Place. I'm going to choose Place Embedded because what that does is it becomes part of this document. If I place Linked, it's going to exist outside of the document, and then we're not going to kind of know where it is. So I found this ivory off-white paper texture. I'm going to place that. And to make it the right size, I'm going to hold down Shift while I'm adjusting it, turning it, and then I'm going to like resize it as well. If I hold down the Option key, it kind of will resize it from the center. And you shouldn't need to press the Shift key because in Photoshop it should automatically maintain those proportions. Now if you you're going to see this X here after you resize it. You can either press this check mark up on the control bar, or you can double click, and that will basically like put the image down as a full size. So our paper texture, we can rename this paper texture. It's always important to name your layers, and I'm just going to rename this one butterfly because that's what it is. And so now, basically what we want to do is we want to change the blending mode on the paper to multiply. So when we do that and we click here and hit multiply, what we're doing is we're actually going to see that paper texture, but we're also going to see the image behind it. The next thing we want to do is we want to go to this butterfly layer, and we're going to put a mask on there. So we're not selecting anything. We're just going to click on that mask symbol. It's going to create the mask. And then what we want to do is we want to fill it with black. And that's because we want to hide the whole image. And then we're going to use our watercolor brushes to paint back in the image. So I make sure that I have my mask selected. So notice that I can click on the thumbnail or I can click on the mask. I want to have that mask selected. Then I can just take my paint bucket, make sure that my black is on top, and I can just click, and what that'll do is it'll fill that whole mask with black. So that means we're hiding our image right now, and we can actually paint in the mask to kind of bring back our image. Now, maybe you've done some work with brushes, or maybe you haven't, but there are plenty of brushes that Adobe provides. I'm connecting like free watercolor brushes that you can like very easily include into your brush panel. So in order to like add more brushes to a brush panel, you can download free brushes from the internet, you can make your own, but you go to the fly down menu, you go to where it says import brushes, and then you find that brush file. So in this case, it's these MC-BAD watercolor, and a brush file is always a .abr. And I'm just going to hit open, and what that should do is it should add those brushes to the bottom of my panel. Now Kyle has some watercolor brushes that you could also try using. You can kind of experiment with whatever you want. Just note that some of Kyle's brushes I have so many brushes in here, but basically like some of the brushes, you're going to see this little icon at the top right that tells you whether it's a brush or whether it's a smudge or whether kind of how you use it. So brushes can get really complicated. It just depends on what you're working with. So basically here are, these are the smoke brushes. Okay, here are the MC-BAD watercolor brushes. Here you can see some of Kyle's water brushes. And so basically I just like click on this, and I have to make sure that my white is in the foreground. And then when I kind of start painting, okay, so you're gonna just kind of use these different watercolor brushes, different sizing, different brushes. They're all going to kind of give you a different effect. You don't want to kind of use the same one over and over again, because basically what's going to happen is it's going to be repeated too many times, and then you're going to kind of see that like overdone. So what I'm doing is I'm actually like switching between a bunch of different brushes. I'm making them pretty large, and what I'm doing is they're kind of transparent. So like I'm clicking a couple times in areas that like I don't want to be, that I want to be dark. And then in areas where like basically you kind of have like a lot of creative freedom here. But like areas that like maybe I don't want it to be as dark, like I kind of want these like edges to be a little bit softer, I can kind of just use the brush like that. So like this is, I feel like, giving me this like really nice kind of wash effect, and then I can choose like a different brush to kind of just hold it down, and that's going to make it look more realistic. So I'm just clicking multiple times to kind of get that darker look, and let me make this bigger. Trying not to move my mouse too much. And so that's going to give me that like real watercolor effect. And if I don't want to, I don't have to put like any like paint like in those other areas. So I can kind of like make this a little bit bigger, and then kind of just put like a little bit there. And so this is going to give me that real watercolor effect. Okay. So basically what's really cool about the SmartObject, right, is that now that I've done all this work, I can actually take this same like filters and the same masking and everything and apply it to a different picture. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of save this as, I'm going to save it as butterfly 1. And maybe, you know, you would save it as watercolor project just so that you know what it is. I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. I'm going to save it to my desktop for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my SmartObject. What you're going to see is it's going to open that object in another like tab. So you can see up here it says layer0.psb. And so I have my butterfly over here. I have my layer 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place another image in there. So again, I'm going to choose place embedded. I'm going to find under downloads this other image of a butterfly that I downloaded already. And I'm going to place this in here. I'm going to resize it. So again, Alt and Shift, or actually you should just be able to kind of push Alt. All right, so now I'm going to double click and then I'm going to hit save, which seems like counterintuitive. But I'm going to hit save and then I'm going to go back to my butterfly PSD. So I can actually close out this layer. I don't change the name. I don't hit save as. I just save it. This saves it like over top of the original SmartObject kind of file. I close that and I go to like the butterfly PSD. Okay, I'm going to close that. It's going to bring me back, and what you're going to see is you're going to see that other image. Now, the thing is like what I kind of painted in for this image doesn't really work for this image, but all those same filters are applied. I'm getting that same watercolor effect. So in order to fix this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock the connection between my image and my mask. And I'm going to make sure my mask is selected. And I'm going to just take my move tool and I'm going to move my mask. So what this does is it allows me to kind of like move this over top of the image. I can kind of fill in the rest of this with black just by bringing my black in front and just kind of clicking over here. I've got like a little bit of something here that I might need to fix, but essentially without having to do all that work again, I'm able to recreate this like immediately with a different photo. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could kind of paint more into the mask or do whatever, but basically that's the power of SmartObjects and being able to use a smart object versus just using a regular image. And I can go back and forth between the two. And so now I can just save this as butterfly 2 and I have 2 images with only having to do the work once. Okay. So that's how you use SmartObjects, one of the ways and lots of the benefits to using SmartObjects. So I hope that this is helpful.